Well, I guess we can go ahead and get started. Other people can join as they come in. My name is Gina Malcheski with the Midland section of the American Chemical Society. We're very happy to have those of you who have joined us today, and also to have our speaker, Peter Sinclair, who is going to talk about the renewable solutions to climate change. Peter will introduce himself and give some information about his background.
Okay. So thank you, Gina. I am Peter Sinclair, and I am a Michigan-based videographer for the last 15 years, focusing on questions of energy and environment. And in that pursuit, I've interviewed hundreds of some of the world's best-known scientists and engineers. And my proudest accomplishment is that they still return my calls. And for the last 8 years or so, they've been inviting me to do field work with them in places like this, which is the Greenland ice sheet, 3 times the size of Texas. This is going to start moving in just a second. My computer kind of went to sleep while we were waiting there. Let's try it again. Sorry, folks. Live programming. So there's a few of our members of our team, just for scale. What you'll see is our main campground over here. This is rock that was recently uncovered by melting ice. I elected to camp up here, which was a mistake because I broke my ribs getting up there, but at least I had some nice white noise from the waterfalls as I was writhing in pain. But the point is that the scientists appreciate the commitment to accuracy that I have, and I try to bring that to my discussions of renewable energy, which we will be talking about today. Michigan, it turns out, has quite a bit of support for converting to renewable energy. This recent poll from Michigan State shows that Michigan residents support a transition from our former coal-fired economy to a more renewable one. 90% of the public say they support more solar, only 3% strongly oppose solar. 86% say they support more wind power, and only 5% strongly oppose wind, although I admit I've probably been in a room where they all showed up. But generally, it means that among the broader Michigan population, renewable energy is about as popular as mom and apple pie and all other good things. And the Wall Street Journal gives us some reason why. Global investment in wind and solar is now running about 2 to 1 greater than more traditional nuclear, coal, and gas-fired power plants. And in large part, that's because wind and solar now represent the lowest cost options for generating electricity, according to this MIT expert quoted in the journal. To give you an idea of what that means, I've got a chart from Lazard, which is an international accounting and consulting firm that puts out numbers for the price of new electrical generation every year. It's considered the gold standard for the industry. And so on this graph, everything to the right is more expensive, everything to the left is cheaper. And what that shows us is that wind is actually now the cheapest new energy pretty much across the globe. It's a bit of a range, so your mileage might vary one area to another. Solar coming up fast on the outside, at least the utility scale form of solar. Gas, still competitive, but unlikely that the price of gas power generation is going to continue to drop as rapidly as wind and solar are historically dropping, but we shall see. What is important to understand is that our energy system that we've had for the last 120 years or so is starting to change. We can think of the older energy system as like a bicycle wheel. And if a power plant is at the center of the wheel and the spokes are the transmission lines, and around the wheel are all those things that we use electricity for. And it means that a whole lot of people are all centrally dependent on that large power plant in the middle. And if something goes wrong with that power plant, it's a big problem for all those users. The new thinking about the electrical grid is that it's going to look something more like a web, more like the internet. In other words, on the internet, every one of our computers, hundreds of millions of nodes, computers, cell phones, etc., each one capable of storing, creating, and transmitting information. And on the new electrical grid, similarly, there will be eventually millions of nodes, each one capable of storing, transmitting, and generating energy. And nature shows us that this kind of an arrangement is much more robust, much more resilient. And certainly recent events show us that the resilience in our systems is going to be an absolute premium going forward. I want to show you a video here starting right out. I do a monthly video for a group out of Yale University, the blog Yale Climate Connections. And this one, you're going to see a bit of a profile of some utility executives, including the current CEO of CMS Energy, many of you know of as Consumers Energy, Patty Poppy. But you'll also see some other experts and utility executives describing what this new grid looks like and what the rationale for it is. So I'm going to jump right into that.
You know, post-World War II, electric demand was at a huge steep incline. Farms were being electrified, factories were coming online, we were fueling this great economy, and we needed to build plants as fast as humanly possible. And the reliable, affordable fuel that was available widely was coal, and it did its job. But the formula has changed.
The coal fleet in the U.S. is on average, about 45 years old. And that's about getting to the end of their lifetime anyways. And when we built a lot of these things in the 60s and 70s, we had to build these massive plants to get the economies of scale to make electricity really cheap as electricity use was growing and growing and growing and growing and growing.
Demand flat at best, and if we do our job, it might even decline. The actual per capita usage can go down as buildings are more efficient, lighting's more efficient, HVAC's more efficient. We all know that. So given that, we have the opportunity of a generation to determine with what will we replace these big central station baseload power plants. We will replace them with modular renewables because it's smarter.
What we've seen in the past, especially 2 or 3 years, is a recognition of the impact of falling prices for wind, solar, and storage across the country.
If you don't have certainty in your demand curve, you don't want to take a big bet and overbuild a big power plant. And actually, without the increasing demand, that's just a cost that we would all bear. If we're going to build a gas plant, it's going to be 1,000 megawatts. That's the minimum, efficient size. And so that's the way we used to have to think about it. We don't have to think about it that way now.
Whenever these utilities go, to the capital markets to look for these things, it's hard to fund a gigawatt scale plant anymore. And we have, cheaper alternatives in smaller pieces.
And so if we can modularly add renewables, and we can modularly add those renewables to match demand more timely. At the right time, we can add the supply we need 2 megawatts at a time.
Wind and solar are the cheapest form of energy available to us and in the electricity system in the US. Full stop.
To be honest, 10 years or so ago, when wind was first being developed in the upper Midwest, it was a very disruptive resource for us. We weren't very good at predicting when the wind would blow. The transmission system really wasn't up to par to handle the intermittency of the wind. And quite frankly, it was wreaking havoc with the economics of our baseload coal plants. So we didn't like it much in 2005, 2006 timeframe. Fast forward to today, we've gotten very good at predicting when the wind is going to blow. The transmission system is able to handle the intermittency of all of this wind. It has no emissions. It has no variable costs. It's relatively inexpensive. What's not to like?
Colorado, where I live, where Xcel here is able to buy new wind and solar for less than the cost of continuing to run its existing coal plants. Situations like that are showing up even in Midwest, where Northern Indiana Public Service Company made a similar announcement and is procuring wind and solar to a similar end now as part of its new resource plan.
In the past, you would see that natural gas has been extremely competitive in the resource that you would want to select, but when you start competing and you see cost declines on these renewable resources, you now see them being chosen over these long-term natural gas units.
Everybody in the world has consistently for the last 10 years underpredicted the price declines in solar in particular, but also wind, and now we're seeing that happen with lithium-ion storage as well.
In the past, we've tended to think of our baseload resources, our coal resources, as baseload, and every other resource being supplemental to that, regardless of what it was. Well, that's been turned on its head now. I would suggest to you that wind is quickly becoming the new baseload. And to be viable going forward, all other sources of generation must be flexible enough to be supplemental to the wind. Kind of an exciting thing right now. And you get your mind around that, it makes a lot of sense what we start doing with our other assets and other resources and why we're so committed to the wind.
So that's a pretty good example of what the thinking of mainstream, very conservative utilities is across the Midwest and across America. They are transitioning to renewable energy, not just because it's a good thing to do, but because it is the most cost-effective, and they want to still remain in business over the next few decades, and they see it as absolutely essential that they make that transition. The Energy Information Agency of the U.S. government tells us that wind has now surpassed hydro, meaning all the dams across the United States, including the Hoover Dam and the Grand Coulee Dam and all the thousands of other dams that we know. Wind is now producing more electricity than that power source. And the EIA also tells us that in the coming year or two, they expect renewables to surpass both nuclear and coal in terms of the amount of electricity that they're generating. So these are the fastest growing new sources of energy, and they are rapidly overtaking the old. As far as what the experience has been, Iowa is the state that has the most experience deploying renewables as part of their grid. They have a larger penetration than just about any other state, almost 40%. Most of it wind, increasing amount of solar. But this report from the Cedar Rapids Gazette points out that this has been a very good thing for ratepayers in Iowa, where when adjusted for inflation during this big build out of renewables, Iowans are now spending about 0.5 cent less per kilowatt hour than they did 20 years ago, while the rest of us, on average, are spending about 0.5 cent more. And that's one reason why big high-tech firms like Apple, Facebook, Microsoft, and Google are flocking to Iowa to take advantage of what Apple CEO Tim Cook calls a world-class power grid. Many of these high-tech advanced firms have goals for using 100% renewable energy because they want to be competitive and they want to be global good citizens. And that means that companies like Google and Facebook have deals in Iowa that let them run their data centers completely on renewable energy. And these data centers need a very, very high quality, reliable form of energy. And that's why they're attracted to Iowa. And we're starting to see this happen in Michigan as well. In a location near Grand Rapids, we see a company called Switch, which has built one of these very advanced data centers. When they were first looking for a siting in Michigan, their question was, can you get us the power we need? And the second question, can you get us 100% renewable? And because wind energy is robust in Michigan, we were able to offer that to them, and they were able to bring the largest single outside capital investment in the history of the state, $5 billion. And eventually, when it's all built out, that will be something like 1,000 jobs, badly needed jobs in this area. And these are good, high-paying jobs. Locally, one of our biggest corporate citizens is Dow Chemical. Dow is one of the largest users of wind energy in the world. Dow in 2015 made a contract to run their largest chemical complex in Freeport, Texas, on wind. It is the largest facility of its kind in the Western Hemisphere. It is the crown jewel of Dow's portfolio. They're running it on wind, and it's useful to remember they decided on wind over gas in Texas, which I think is really instructive for us. The Financial Times goes a little bit further on that story in a recent article here, talking about how Texas, the home of oil and gas, is falling in love with solar energy. Renewables have helped to force the closures of coal-fired plants, and they are now challenging the primacy of natural gas as the price of solar and wind keep on falling. I'm going to show you some interviews with some experts here. The first one is Josh Pierce, expert that I had the privilege of speaking to up at Michigan Tech University a few months ago. You're also going to see expert from Michigan State, Wolfgang Bauer, and another solar engineer, Tommy Cleveland.
Today in the U.S., it is economically competitive to put in solar in almost every single application. Usually it's the lowest cost form of energy. That's why you see many of the major corporations moving to large-scale solar. Yes, it greens their image, but more importantly, it's driving their bottom line.
It's actually significantly cheaper to deploy solar resources right now than even building a new coal-fired power plant.
Right now, solar electricity is cheaper than building a new nuclear plant or coal plant or natural gas plant. And in many instances, it's actually cheaper to build a new solar plant and make electricity than to keep using a coal plant that's already been paid for. And once you build a solar plant, it's very low cost to operate. And you compare over the life of those two, the cost of electricity, and the solar electricity is cheaper.
So we just went through this exercise and looked at what does a natural gas-fired power plant cost us. It roughly works out 2 cents per kilowatt hour just from the fuel, from the natural gas that we have to purchase. And this is at historically low natural gas prices because of fracking. So 2 cents for gas, another 2 cents for the capital to build the whole thing, and that's maybe even a little low, maybe 3, so 2.5, and another 1.5 cents for maintenance. So we're talking 6 cents. Solar you can get for a little less than 5 cents. Now if I look at home, what do I pay per kilowatt hour of electricity? Right now it's 15 cents, 3 times more. So solar is definitely competitive.
Solar actually produces the lowest cost power, in part because the marginal cost is so tiny. Once you put the capital onto the plant, your operating costs are basically nothing, and it's producing energy all the time the sun shines. Your marginal costs are really low, which is why it can crush any kind of other type of power plant where you have some sort of a continuous cost. Like if you're burning natural gas, you have to pay for that natural gas. The cost of that natural gas is variable. Right now it's pretty low. Hopefully it stays that way, but there's no guarantee.
So over time, it will have a downward pressure on rates.
Everything else is getting more expensive. Our solar energy will get cheaper and cheaper in comparison through the years.
Okay, so experts are in agreement that not just solar, but wind also becoming more competitive. And so again, what we're seeing at the utility level, this is a graph showing planned expansion for American Electric Power, which is a large utility in the eastern and central United States. What they're showing is a lot of solar, a lot of wind, a little bit of gas. That's pretty typical for what you see across the United States in utility planning these days. And in particular, in the last few months, we've had a sort of a test run of how these new power sources are working under pressure of the coronavirus crisis. And it turns out that wind and solar farms, according to the Wall Street Journal, are being seen by investors as havens because we have an ongoing crisis in the oil and gas industry and a big question mark over even the survival of a whole lot of our smaller oil and gas firms. Meanwhile, demand for wind and solar farms is as strong before as the spread of coronavirus, and maybe even stronger. But I want to get right into some of the questions that people ask, some of the more obvious ones. And maybe number one is, okay, smart guy, what happens when the wind stops blowing or the sun stops shining? And this is known as the intermittency problem. Renewable energy is known as intermittent, meaning sometimes it's here and sometimes it's not. But there's a little secret that power engineers know and have known for 120 years. All power sources are intermittent. They just have different reasons for being intermittent and different logic to them. For instance, with a coal-fired power plant, you have the fuel in form of a giant pile of coal outside. But if you have, say, a rainstorm in February followed by a deep freeze, then what you have is a rock-solid frozen pile of coal, and that will shut down a coal-fired power plant. Similarly, in some of the frigid polar vortex events that we've seen in recent years, which scientists tell me are going to become more frequent, you can have moisture inside a gas pipeline build up and freeze and block the line, and that will shut down a gas-fired power plant. We know from historical data that you can expect a coal-fired plant to be offline about 44 days of the year, a nuclear plant about 36 days of the year. Every 17 to 18 months, it has to be shut down to refuel. Which takes for something like 4 to 6 weeks. Yet we don't see the lights go off every time one of these big plants goes offline. And that's because power engineers know how to keep reserve generation in place. They have other power plants on the network that are operating, just not generating power. It's called spinning reserve. It's a little bit wasteful, you might say, but it makes sure that when something breaks, something goes down, whether it's a nuclear, coal, gas, or whatever it might be, the lights stay on. An example might be, this is the Perry nuclear power plant on Lake Erie, and a news item from the local paper in Ohio. That plant was refueled about a year ago, and they actually did a very good, very efficient job. The shutdown was only 27 days, so 4 weeks, set a record in terms of refueling for that plant. But it was offline for a month, taking 1,200 megawatts with it. But the lights in Ohio did not go off because we have a grid that makes allowances for that, and it works very efficiently. Just a few months later, after the plant went back online, it gave us an example of another type of challenge when it went offline suddenly, had to be shut down for malfunction following a weekly testing, and it was down for several days. But again, thankfully there was no safety issue at that time. But the lights did not go off in Ohio because, again, the grid had enough redundancy in it that engineers were able to handle it. So for engineers to be able to handle the sudden loss of 1,200 megawatts, shows you that it's a relatively manageable problem to be able to deal with the very predictable ups and downs of wind and solar. And we have a new wild card in the mix that just 5 years ago, no one would have predicted. The price of battery storage for energy has been dropping at a precipitous rate. And this here is, for the moment, the world's largest lithium-ion battery storage unit. And if your eyes are good, you can see the word Tesla on one of those battery packs. Tesla is, of course, the darling of Wall Street and the maker of all those beautiful electric cars. But their key technology is actually their battery. And this unit was built in Australia to run in tandem with a wind farm. And it has, in fact, been extremely effective, extremely efficient, and we're now seeing a number of units like this and much larger being built around the world. The Financial Times picks up on this and talks about how batteries are making it possible for solar power no longer to be confined to daylight hours, and similarly wind power no longer confined to when the wind is blowing. This market and this technology has been exploding, and it's really surprised everybody. But here in Michigan, as a matter of fact, we are not limited to lithium-ion batteries. In fact, we've very much solved the energy storage problem with a unit that we have near Lake Michigan called the Ludington Pumped Storage Power Plant that a lot of people don't know about it. But it's really the world's largest battery. And I'm going to go again to my experts, Wolfgang Bauer and Patty Poppy, to describe what this unit is and how it works and how it integrates with our grid.
The remaining question is, of course, what do you do about energy storage, right? And fortunately in Michigan, this has been solved completely. We have the largest battery that I know of, at least in North America, here in Michigan, and it's called the Ludington Pump Hydro Storage Plant.
Ludington Pump Storage is the great engineering marvel, one of the great engineering marvels of the world. It is the 4th largest battery in the world. It has 6 units. I don't know how familiar you are, if you've ever visited, but you should, because it's gorgeous. It's the most gorgeous power plant in the world. On the banks of Lake Michigan, pumps water up into a 27 billion gallon reservoir, and we have the 6 largest motors in the world. Each unit has a 500,000 horsepower motor. And those 6 largest motors in the world pump the water up. They power the pumps that take the water up into the reservoir. And then when we need the power, those motors rotating in reverse generate electricity. 2,200 megawatts of carbon-free, emission-free, clean, pure Michigan power. Today, we fill the reservoir once a day. But when we have fully deployed those 5 and then 6,000 megawatts of solar, we'll have excess power in the day. California is dealing with this, and they're concerned about what do you do with extra power in the daytime.
In Arizona these days, between the hours of 11 a.m. and 2 p.m., we get negatively priced electricity from California. There's so much solar being produced in California, they can't use it all. They push it to Arizona during those hours and pay our utilities to take it off the grid.
And guess what we're going to do with it? We're going to pump and fill the reservoir at Ludington. And then we're going to use that reservoir to serve the peak load. And then at night, our wind farms generating extra electricity will also then refill the pond, and we're going to get to refill that pond twice a day because of the upgrade we've done on those motors. That is exciting. That doubles the capacity of that battery for the service of people of Michigan and the inclusion then in our clean energy plan.
So Michigan is ideally placed to actually lead the renewable energy revolution that is happening. All we need is the political will to move forward with that. The pumped hydro storage is just one of dozens of energy storage technologies, many, many newer ones coming along that would have to be the subject of another presentation. But just to give you an example of the potential for that one technology, the Australian National University recently did a global survey of potential pump storage sites and found 616,000 feasible pump storage sites with enough potential for 100 times more than would be required to support a completely renewable global electricity system. And as an example, I was recently up in the UP at Michigan Tech talking to experts up there who have been looking at the potential for using abandoned iron mines as possible utility scale pump storage batteries. There are something like 2,000 shafts and 800 mines just in the 7 western counties of the Upper Peninsula, thousands more in Wisconsin, thousands more in Minnesota. And these could be converted simply by retrofitting them, sealing them up, and using the upper chambers to store water during times when there's a lot of electricity, and at times of need, opening them up, letting the water fall to the lower shaft through a turbine and generating power that way. And the potential here is absolutely staggering. Dr. Roman Sidortsov, who is one of the experts involved here, showed me back of the envelope calculations for just one mine near Houghton, Michigan, which would have within itself the power, could store the power basically to run the whole city of Grand Rapids for 10 hours. And remember, there are thousands and thousands of these mines. And of particular interest is that we can't really build more of these pump storage plants, say, along the shores of the Great Lakes. That real estate's just simply too expensive. But these mines have already been constructed. They've already been hollowed out. There's no need to move any earth to create these new facilities. And very important, they already have roads, railways, and most importantly, transmission lines already in place leading into each of these facilities. So storage here would not require any great environmental impact because the facility is essentially already in place. And if you combine that with the potential for electrical generation from offshore wind in Lake Superior, which is potentially equivalent to dozens or even hundreds of large nuclear plants, you have the possibility for rapidly decarbonizing major parts of the industrial Midwest with facilities that are essentially already available. And I want to finish up by talking about what's happening here in mid-Michigan, because we've had wind development here now for a decade, and local communities have had that long to look it over, to evaluate it. And what they are seeing is a technology that they can live with, that has many advantages that they like. And I've been traveling around the area talking to local officials to learn about the many advantages, particularly the financial advantages for our rural communities, which have been hollowed out in the last several decades from the loss of industry and manufacturing. And now they're starting to see big financial benefits from having renewable energy. So I'm going to play some of these interviews here so you can get a feel for what's going on out there in rural Midwest.
You know, wind turbines in our area, I mean, the ones that just went up are in the range of $3 million a copy in value. You know, taxable value, that's half that, $1.5 million. You take 27 of those, and all of a sudden you've become a major player in what you're paying in taxes. And I don't think they were put in because of taxes, but clearly that's a side benefit. They're huge numbers, in the millions of dollars of taxes that have been raised for the county And all of its special voted millages, from the sheriff to the library to the road patrol to senior citizens, all of those millages benefit. The largest beneficiary has been schools and the RESD on items that are able to be taxed, sinking funds, bonds, those kind of things. Huge dollars get paid. It means that the average taxpayer is paying less, or they're paying those bonds off much quicker than they could without all of that tax base that was there. And we all know it's Michigan. I mean, you know, there are campaigns that some advertise to fix the roads. Well, you got to have money to fix the roads, and clearly these are a step in the right direction. They're not a user of tax government personnel. I mean, I don't need extra police because I've now got $90 million worth of turbines. I don't need extra fire department. I don't have ambulance calls. I don't have to build schools because somehow they bring kids with them. They just sit there and provide a benefit of life and a quality of life for everyone else.
The township and the senior citizens and everybody else had to do nothing. Nothing. They didn't need to build a road. They didn't need to construct a center. They didn't need to do anything. They didn't need to put in a power line. All they needed to do is add a line on their tax forms, and the money just comes rolling in.
In our township, last year we charged residents 1.75 mils per fire protection. With the turbines coming on this year, we dropped it to 1 mil. I mean, so every taxpayer is saving at least 3/4 of a mil just on the township fire department.
And speaking of fire departments, I spoke to a fire chief in nearby Breckenridge about the benefits that they've seen, very tangible benefits for their fire rescue since the wind turbines have gone in there.
I love being the fire chief here at Breckenridge. I've been an officer on the department for roughly 15 years, and I've just slowly worked my way up. It's a family to me. It's my second family. With windmill funding, we've been able to buy a lot of stuff for the department. We just got a 2019 fire truck with the funding. We've been able to buy a lot of equipment that we wouldn't have been able to buy.
Wind turbines have provided a lot of extra revenue for our township. They've provided us with about almost $60,000 extra a year for our roads. They provide us about $150-some thousand annually for our fire rescue department, and another $60,000 for just general township revenue that we use in our budget.
We've been able to upgrade all of our appliances to new. We've been able to get all brand new hose for the truck, all brand new nozzles for the truck. It's helped outstanding for our community, for our fire department alone. I've been on 21 years. We've always got hand-me-down stuff. And for the last 5, 6, 7 years since the windmills, we've just been upgrading, it seems like yearly, our new equipment. Fundings from the windmill made it possible to buy this truck. It's been in service for us for about 2 weeks now. This is very reliable compared to our old grass trucks that we've had in the past on the fire department. So this is our Polaris Ranger. We also use this to fight field fires, forest fires. This will carry another 5 to 6 firefighters also. It has a 55-gallon tank of water on the back of it that we can use to help extinguish the fire. We've had issues in the past where the old units just didn't start up, so they weren't reliable. And so with the extra money that we've had coming in for years now, our board was grateful enough to let us order a brand new 2019 Chevy pickup. So we also train yearly with the local windmill companies. They'll do it like a person might have a cardiac arrest up in the tower. They start the rescue efforts of bringing them down via rope. We officially take over when they're on the ground. We've been very fortunate where we have responded to 0 incidents with the windmill companies here. One of our local windmill companies, Invenergy, also donates $2,500 to us every year for the fire prevention program when we put it on for the school kids, which makes it very nice. You always remember it. You remember every scene. You remember every scene. It doesn't matter, street corner, house, accidents, when you go by it, they always come back into the back of your memory. We're just not out fighting fire, helping people with rescues. We're out there. We volunteer to help the community out. If they need yards raked, we're volunteering to rake yards for them. They give to us with their millage, so why not give back to them?
So Michigan is on the cusp of a transition to renewable energy, and it's on such a scale that it's gaining national attention. The Wall Street Journal recently did a profile of Patty Poppe, who you've seen today, and how dramatic the transition is for Consumers Energy and Michigan's other major utility, DTE, in transitioning to renewable from heavily coal-based to almost entirely renewable over the next couple of decades. And so this is pretty much a model for what utilities might be looking like over the next few years. And what Consumers Energy and DTE are doing is certainly a complete pivot from what we saw just 5 years ago in this space. And we're in a decade of incredibly rapid change because of the maturity of the wind and solar technologies. And so I'm going to wrap the formal part of the presentation right there and see if I can open things up to questions if there are any at this point. Feel free to get on Facebook and visit Sun 101 or Wind 101. There's plenty of new information constantly going up there, and also at times a lively discussion. You can contact me at greenman@tm.net if you have any further questions. And with that, I would like to open it up to questions.
Right now, I don't see any questions in the Q&A. Please, if you do have questions, feel free to put them in there. And then while we're discussing that, I'll put the survey link into the chat. Anyone have any questions?
I believe now would be a good time to link the survey.
Okay, I will put the survey in there. Peter, can you make a comment about microgrids and people putting up solar panels on residences? You know, I don't know what the tax benefits of those are, if they still exist or not, or, you know, if you can sell back solar if you decide to put some on your house, or how that would go. Any comments about that?
Well, what we can say is that we don't really have a national policy on that that applies to everybody. So what you have is 50 programs in 50 different states. And so some of the states are really kind of leading the pack in terms of making it as attractive as possible for homeowners and small businesses to put solar on their roofs. And Michigan is somewhere in the middle. And we're kind of going through a review of that with the new governor that we have, the new administration, and with the rapidly changing technology. What I expect to see is that we're going to have some changes in what is called net metering, and that's the policy that determines how much a homeowner, for instance, would be paid for any additional electricity that they might generate. And the states that have a very generous net metering policy are seeing rapid uptake by companies that will come in and actually put solar panels on your roof for free. So places like California, Colorado, Nevada, you see that. We're not quite there in Michigan yet, but we're seeing rapid rollout of utility scale solar, which is going to help keep residential rates down. And I expect that in coming years, as the technology changes and as the economics continue to improve, we're going to see some changes in the regulatory environment that could have impact on homeowners and business owners' options in Michigan.
We do have some questions now. One is, do you know of any other major front-runner states in the renewable energy transformation aside from Michigan?
Well, Iowa, of course, is huge for wind. Kansas, the Dakotas, Texas is actually an enormous market for both wind and solar. As a percentage, the percentage is not as great in Texas, but the grid is so massive that actually Texas has more renewable energy than just about any other state. California has a large amount of wind, a large amount of solar. North Carolina is actually number 2 in solar. And there are a number of other states like New Jersey, Massachusetts, Minnesota, and others that are rapidly adjusting their regulatory policies to become more competitive in renewables. We're also seeing rapid development along the coastal states in potential for offshore wind. And offshore wind is another technology that a lot of observers just 5 years ago assumed would not be a factor until maybe the 2030s, and it's already becoming extremely competitive in price. So it's a bit of a moving target, but there are a number of states kind of in the running. The advantages that Michigan has is that we are still the world's leader in advanced manufacturing, and we have a large demand for electricity that's right here. So we don't need a whole lot of transmission to get the electricity to where it's going to be used. So that's an advantage, and hopefully we can become a leader in manufacturing a lot of these components. We manufacture just down the road from me in Hemlock, Michigan. We have Hemlock Semiconductor, which produces the polycrystalline silicon that goes not just into computers but also into solar panels. And we have dozens of other smaller manufacturers producing various components for all this stuff. Next question. Yeah, some of the solar energy sources, one of the first slides, are really expensive. Can you explain more about the difference? Well, the expensive ones are tend to be the ones that you put on your rooftop. The utility scale, it's like any kind of industrial process. When you do it at a larger scale, it's cheaper. When you want to put solar panels on your roof on a unit basis, it's more expensive. And that's why there is this ongoing discussion about how homeowners should be compensated for any extra electricity that they generate. And in those states that have very generous regulatory policies that allow homeowners to make a high rate on extra electricity, there are companies who find it worthwhile in their business model to actually come in and essentially lease your roof space to put solar panels on your roof for free. And then essentially the power, they are selling the power, you're buying it at a much reduced rate, so you save money and they make money. And that is a successful business model in a lot of states. So there are business models being devised around the country to sort of get around that upfront cost of the solar roofs, say for your house or for your small business, and that's the difference between the higher price and the lower price. And yeah, what's going to power the making of renewable resources? Well, when you are using electricity off the grid, then it sort of depends on where you are. Very much like if you have an electric car, is the power that runs your electric car, is that coming from a coal-fired power plant? Or is it coming from a gas plant? Is it coming from a solar panel? And so, for instance, even in those states where they are still very much coal heavy. If I'm running an electric car, the electric car is so much more efficient that it is actually less emissions to run that electric car powered by coal than it would be to run it on gas. And as the grid switches over from fossil fuel energy to more renewable or carbon-free energy, then we're going to see the energy value, or the carbon value, if you like, of these various industrial components gradually become cleaner and greener as we go forward. And I see another question: what's going to happen when it's night and no wind? And I think I covered that in a couple of the slides there, but if you missed it, it's basically we're getting much better at electricity storage. And in fact, here in Michigan, we have one of the world's largest batteries in the Ludington Pump Storage power unit. And that is going to allow our utilities to essentially store excess wind or solar power that they produce during the day and the night, and carry it over for hours or sometimes even days to make sure that solar power is usable even when the sun's not out, and wind power is usable even when the wind's not blowing. Okay, despite all the advantages of switching to renewable energy, why are many companies still choosing to use coal or natural gas as their main source of energy? Well, I would say for those companies that have, not all companies are generating their own energy. Most of them are buying energy off the grid. And for those companies that are choosing to get into self-generation, more and more of them are choosing renewable energy. So for instance, General Motors has a policy of getting to 100% carbon-free or renewable energy by mid-century. So they are looking for to be able to purchase more and more renewable energy across the country. They're not there yet. They won't be there for a couple of decades. But most corporate leadership across the country and around the world get it that the transition to renewables is underway, and it's not only the right thing to do, it's making them money and saving them money. So you're going to see more and more of that going forward. So another one: what's the best way for the average person to encourage companies as well as the powers that be to up their game in renewable energy? Well, first of all, the main thing is to talk about it with your political representative, with local people, with people at the water cooler, with the newspaper editor. Let people know that you think this is something that's important, if you do, and start, looking yourself. I know I'm kind of keeping my eye on the prices of electric cars, which are steadily dropping, and in the next 3 or 4 years, there's going to be probably dozens of models of electric cars available for that would be competitively priced for an average middle-class person like myself to purchase. So that's one way of sending a signal into the marketplace. And I think you should be aware that there are in our communities opportunities to support renewable development. For instance, I'm based in Midland County. In Midland County and Saginaw County, we're going to see a build out of wind energy and solar energy in coming months. Certainly wind, we're going to see very soon, kind of depending, I guess, on the coronavirus, what the coronavirus lets us do. But in two of the southern Midland County townships, you're going to see wind. And so I would say let people know that you support that. And write a letter to the paper, go out, take a look at the wind turbines and see what you think. Pull your car off the road, listen to them, and look them over. And I think most people are pleasantly surprised. Not only that they're quiet, they're clean, they're beautiful, and they're producing cheap energy. So good. Looks like we got through the questions.
Okay. Okay. Oh, wait a minute. Okay. How much?
Okay, that's a great question.
Yeah.
Coronavirus, what is the impact of coronavirus on renewable energy? Well, the nice thing about renewable energy is that the wind turbines, for instance, on a day like today, when we've got kind of a windstorm going outside, those turbines are cranking away at a pretty good rate, and they don't need a whole lot of supervision to do that, and you don't need crowds of people to get together to service wind turbines. So that's an advantage compared to, say, large coal-fired or nuclear-fired power plant, where my understanding is that those teams of critical engineers are pretty much having to be isolated on site to protect them from coronavirus exposure, because you can't lose too many people on your critical team for, say, a nuclear plant if you're going to be able to do everything that you have to do safely. Particularly in the coming year, when we've got a lot of nuclear plants that are going to have to go through a refueling process. The question mark that a lot of the renewable developers have is for those that have projects in the pipeline, and there are several here in the mid-Michigan area, is this going to slow down the construction process now that we're getting into the nicer weather, when most of them had planned to be erecting wind turbines and putting in solar panels? What kind of work rules are you going to have to institute to allow crews to be able to get this work done, or is that something that's going to have to be delayed? And in some cases where there's still some permitting going on that has to do with local townships and local county officials meeting, those meetings are going to have to be taking place virtually, just like this one. So there's some question mark as to whether that's going to slow things down, or whether we'll be able to adapt and move forward with that. So there's a few question marks, but it doesn't seem like anything insurmountable any more than what we're seeing in the rest of the economy. And I hope that we can move through this process and maintain our social distancing and hopefully tamp this outbreak down so that we can all get back to work.
I can't figure out how to type one in there, so I'm going to ask you a question.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
What about the big offshore wind project, the LEED project or whatever, offshore in Lake Erie in Ohio? Can you comment about that? Or I don't even know at what stage that is, but.
I don't have any specific information about that particular project. I know that what I can tell you generically is that there are a number of ideas for offshore wind in the Great Lakes. And the biggest breakthrough that has really come through in the last 4 or 5 years is we now have wind turbines that can go into really deep water. And much of the argument about wind turbines offshore, both here in the Great Lakes and, say, along the East Coast, has come from people who are concerned about looking out on the ocean and seeing, or looking out on a lake and seeing wind turbines. We now have the technology to place these things far enough out so that they essentially are going to be invisible. And so I think that's going to really set aside a whole lot of the concerns that people have had. And I suspect that we're going to see the Great Lakes emerge as a very important producer of wind energy in the coming decades.
Okay, any questions from anyone else at this point? I should advise you that we have additional seminars coming up this week at 4 p.m. on Wednesday. We have a talk from a meteorologist from the Detroit area who's going to show a lot of data that relates to climate change itself. We encourage you to come and join that conversation as well. And then on Thursday at 4 p.m. we have Dana Kirk from Michigan State University that's going to address the food waste issue and what Michigan State in particular is some of the projects going on at Michigan State relative to that. And then a week from now at 4 p.m. we have our last seminar that will be again focused on some activities in the Great Lakes or some impacts of climate change on cities in the Great Lakes. And we hope you can come back and join us for that. Again, one more time, the survey link is in the chat. If you would copy and paste that into your browser and answer the questions there, we'd really appreciate it. And with that, I guess we'll thank Peter. And are there geothermal power plants? There's another question.
Are there geothermal power plants? Yes, there are. There most certainly. It's kind of geographically dependent in that you need hot rocks relatively close to the surface. So the Rocky Mountain West, California, Nevada, the Appalachians apparently have a really good geothermal potential that we'd like to see developed. I have visited a geothermal plant in Iceland. Iceland has tremendous geothermal output, and it really produces a lot of carbon-free power between the geothermal and the hydro. And I expect we're going to see more of it. It's actually as we transition from oil and gas, I think you're going to find that the same kind of technology and expertise that people have used in the oil and gas industry will be very useful in constructing geothermal power plants, which I think we're going to see a lot more of.
Okay. Thanks again to everyone for your participation today, and thanks to Peter. And hope everybody has a good Earth Day, and hope to see you back again for some of the seminars later in the series.
Thanks a lot.
Have a good night.